Most athletes think hydration is simple. Just drink water when you're thirsty. Today, I'm speaking with Stefan van der Fluit, co-founder of FlowBio, who's proving that the approach is not only wrong, but potentially dangerous. Stefan co-founded the world's first fully reusable sweat sensor, which provides athletes with real-time data on exactly how much water and sodium their body needs. What started as solving his own hydration struggles has evolved into technology that's changing how we understand personalized performance. We'll dive into the science behind sweat variability, why a single sweat test isn't enough, and how Stefan's building partnerships that could revolutionize the entire sports nutrition industry. Stefan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so you had mentioned that you've always struggled with hydration as an athlete. Can you walk us through what that looked like and how it led you to create FlowBio?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it went back even before I was competing as a cyclist or triathlete. I grew up, well, as you can tell from my surname, I'm not American, but I sound it. I actually grew up in California, and it was really there that I noticed just how bad I was at hydrating just by feel, so to speak. I mean, during the kind of warmer months, I would be going home 2, 3 times a week from school, which ended up resulting or being due to dehydration, just me not consuming enough fluids throughout the day. So I've always struggled with like a higher sweat rate and replacing the fluids required then as a function of my body thermoregulating itself. This obviously was heightened when I started getting into endurance sports because naturally when you're, sat in school, you're obviously thermoregulating, but nowhere near the degree when you're pushing power on a bike in like, 25, 30 Celsius race conditions. So that's really for me where I noticed a massive impact on my ability to recover, and really on the second half of the race. And like I used to compete in Ironman, so typically like the last 20K in the bike and the after that the half marathon. That's when I really like noticed the impacts, which typically for me showed up as headaches, dizziness, lethargy, not really cramping, but yeah, definitely the kind of feeling like you have empty legs or you really have to rein back the power that you're putting out just because you're kind of feeling like you're slightly overcooking yourself. So yeah, that's always impacted me until obviously I learned about not only really like how much to consume, more just electrolytes really. I was a triathlete for 3, 4 years before I took my first electrolyte. And I think that's something quite common with a lot of amateur endurance athletes, especially because when we grow up, we're told that sodium is bad for you, right? So the last thing you're about to do is ingest extra sodium. But I think this advice is especially dangerous for people competing and training long hours because yeah, our bodies lose a significant amount of sodium as a result of our training, and if we're not adequately replacing that, then we get into some really murky waters. So it really started off there, my own personal issues and curiosities around how how does this come to be? How is it that like a hydration test, because I did a test way back when with precision hydration, how is it that this number, now that I have this number, still isn't solving my problems in training or race conditions? And that's really what kind of slowly but surely got my head thinking around, is this something that you could solve through technology, through wearables? And that's when my co-founder and I, Giovanni, we met and we sparred on some different ideas, and this was the one that really piqued both of our interests. And then yeah, we started to explore how to solve it, and 5 and a bit years later, here we are with the device in hand.
Excellent. So awesome. So here's something most people don't realize. You've discovered that sweat composition changes drastically from session to session. Can you explain why the traditional maybe one sweat test fits all approach is actually misleading athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the physiological community has always demonstrated that our sweat sodium changes as a result of our body's heat acclimatization. So in the warmer months, we typically lose less sodium relative to our kind of our normal values or comparable values. So right, if you were to do the same bike, the exact same session, but in warmer months, compared to your colder month session, you would lose less sodium concentration. So your salt is less, or your sweat is less salty, so to speak. So that was widely understood by the physiological community that translating its way into the actual applied nutrition and just like coaching and an athlete understanding, that never really made its way. So that allowed for the confusion that some companies introduced, which was you just need to do one single test. So there's a variety of ways that athletes prior to the Flow biosensor were able to understand high level, finger in the air, like, am I salty? Am I not salty? Right. So that was a single static test that you would perform either at rest, where they would induce sweat, or you would get on a stationary bike and wear an absorbent patch. That absorbent patch would then be squeezed out onto a sensor. But again, these tests would only give you data for the day, essentially, for that session. But they were communicated to the athlete as this is your number, period. This is it. This is like your number for life. Whereas in actual fact, that was their number for that session. And this was actually one of the biggest, I'd say, leap of faith assumptions. Like every company when they start has their leap of faith assumption, right? Like their big, oh shit, if this works, then we unlock a whole new opportunity. If this doesn't work, then we might as well pack up our bags and go home. And that was our leap of faith assumption, was it's worthwhile having a continuously measuring sweat device, because your sweat needs to be continually observed because it changes. So the way that we actually validated that for ourselves is way back when, I think this was like 6-7 months in, we sent out what we call the sweat test kit. So this was an absorbent patch kit where people would wear it on 5 different sessions. We asked them to do different things on each session. So do an easy, do a hard, do an inside, do an outside. And that day, that sweat then came back to our lab. We would analyze it. And then, yeah, we had an Excel spreadsheet, still have it to this day, where you would actually see the numbers, the sweat rate and the sweat sodium was changing. So we kept it to an hour because sweat rate is typically measured over an hour period. So we asked athletes to do 5 1-hour sessions so that we could see if the sweat rate and sweat sodium changes. Because if that's the case, then it warranted us to develop the sensor. If it wasn't the case, we probably would have pivoted the business and the business model. But yeah, it was very cool to see. And it was, some of the first data in the world at the time to actually demonstrate that your sweat sodium concentration does indeed fluctuate. I probably won't do it just because technology and it's a bit iffy, but on my phone, I've got the app, obviously, because I use the sensor every day for my training. My sweat sodium over the last 20 sessions, so this is really over the last like 2 and a bit weeks, varies all the way from 0.4 grams per liter all the way up to 1.2 grams per liter. So you can see how a one-time test is highly inadequate, because if I did that one-time test, say on the 0.4 gram day, and the company would say, okay, you lose 0.4 grams a liter, I would be 3 times off of what I needed to consume on a hard session or a hot
Wow.
session. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I mean, I don't think we fully understood what we've found yet, because it's obviously early days, but yeah, we've really unlocked a new insight into the human body, which previously was just not there. So there's a lot of now education and upskilling that the world of sport needs to do around nutrition companies, around practitioners, nutritionists, the athletes themselves, and their behavior when it comes to hydration.
Talk about, I mean, is there anything else that you could throw in there about like the different states of dehydration that most athletes don't know about?
Yeah, so dehydration it's a very misunderstood state or term, right? So dehydration, typically when I say dehydration to you or to anyone listening on this podcast, immediately 9 times out of 10, for the 1 person out of 10 that gets it right, they probably did a lot of reading on this, but for the 90% of us, we think not enough water. Dehydration is not enough water. That is incorrect. Dehydration is actually the balance of water to electrolytes. So this is where it gets a bit more confusing. There's actually 4 kinds of dehydration. So it's split between hyper and hypo. So hyper is too little, hypo is too much. And then so it's a 2x2 grid of hyper, hypo, and then neutremia and hydration. So you can have hyperhydration, which is what we call, colloquially speaking, dehydration, too little water. But you can also have hypohydration, which is actually water intoxication, which is you have too much water. And fun fact for most people out there who suffer from dehydration, especially in an endurance event, it's mostly hypohydration. Why? Because in the back of our head, we think, I need to be consuming water. I don't want to get dehydrated. So every opportunity available, they're drinking plain water. Every aid station they go to, every time they fill up their bottle, they fill it up with plain water, and they're just downing plain water. What happens is you completely flush out your electrolyte balance.
Wow.
So you have little to no sodium in your blood. So that's hypohydration. Then you have the inverse for sodium for the electrolyte balance. So you have hypernatremia, that's too little sodium, and hyponatremia, which is too much sodium. So you can quickly see how incredibly complex it becomes to tell someone to hydrate appropriately because you have these four states, and the states take place as a function of a whole host of variables, including the time of year, i.e., your body's heat acclimated status, the intensity of the exercise you're doing, the time of day, because that influences the weather, the energy, the environmental conditions. So yeah, it's very difficult to just, from a single evaluation study in a lab, ascertain what it is that you need to drink today versus next week. So yeah, that really is, I'd say the problem we are solving is we're bringing, yeah, I'd say clarity to what is a very misunderstood but incredibly important functioning of our body, right? If you're dehydrated, sorry, that impacts everything from your digestion to your energy balance to your muscle output to your cognitive function. It's really critical to our bodies to be properly hydrated if you're asking them or if you're asking it to really push its limits and go beyond what it was designed to do, right? Like we
Yeah.
weren't designed to finish an Ironman or to finish the Tour de France. We've adapted our body to do so, which is, the amazing machinery that is our body. It will adapt to what you subject it to, but then you also need to account for all of the variables that it then requires on top of its baseline in order to stay safe in that new kind of adapted state.
Oh, it's fascinating. I don't know if we can touch on this, but it's like thinking if you get sick and you've got some stomach flu, some extra stuff coming out, and it's like the first
Yeah.
thing you want to do is extra electrolytes.
Well,
You're
correct,
just
right?
pounding the electrolytes.
And that's why doctors, especially exactly if you have digestive issues or diarrhea, say, right, like doctors are telling you you need to supplement significantly more electrolytes. So I think Pedialyte is the brand in the US. That's typically so in the US when I travel and I've run out of my electrolytes during training, I buy Pedialyte. Why? Because it's typically a gram per liter. It's some of the strongest stuff that you can buy over the counter apart from like dedicated sport nutrition products, which aren't typically actually sold in grocery stores. You have to buy them direct from their websites because it's still most over-the-counter products of sodium are still very low sodium because the consumer is so alert of high sodium and they won't touch it. So actually the high sodium product doesn't sell well in a retail environment still, just because the consumer is so incredibly
They go to look at that and they're
programmed.
like,
They
oh,
look at the sodium and they're like,
yeah.
whoa, that's way too much
And
sodium.
it's
I won't
actually
touch that.
what you're trying to get.
Yeah.
So you guys have created a fully reusable biosensor. What was the breakthrough that allowed you to engineer a rolling issue?
Yeah, yeah. So you have two issues typically when it comes to biosensors. One, it's the shelf life of the actual sensor, right? So like how long can the sensor perform and keep its error to a minimum. And then the second one is the biofouling, yeah, which is the as a biosensor gets used, the bodily fluid kind of builds up on top over time. Which kind of creates noise and prevents a good reading from the device. So what we basically managed to engineer around are those two constraints. So it's a proprietary sodium sensor, which basically, yeah, with accelerated testing, we see around a 3.5 to 4 year shelf life. So without any kind of issues in the readings, right? It obviously can last longer, but then we don't really trust the readings anymore from in terms of like our super high bar of precision and accuracy. So that's the first piece is the actual sensor itself, and then the second is what we call the sweat capture system. So it's the way in which we capture and get rid of water or sweat. It's engineered to like easily pass through, and then by a user just rinsing it under the sink, be able to clean the actual sensor with no contamination of the sensor because the sensor is 2 layers deep, so there's no actual touching of the sensor ever by the end user. So yeah, it's an incredibly it's a very difficult proposition to create a consumer friendly biosensor, right? Creating a biosensor, that's one thing, but then creating something which can be packaged up and sent to an end user who, realistically speaking, they're not going to wash it as frequently as you'd like them to wash it, but it still needs to perform
Yeah.
as if they'd expect it to, regardless of them following the user manual or not, or the protocols. So that really is, I would say, the biggest piece of innovation is the fact that we've been able to create something which not only provides that level of accuracy that we expect from ourselves, because we're a very scientific company, that's in our DNA, that's our founding, the two founders, one of which is a PhD. So it's always been very much our core of like scientific rigor and validity. But then obviously the other founder, myself, I'm an end user, I'm a performance athlete. Like it needs to be able to live up to the demands of a performance athlete. One of them being we're very time poor. We're not going to spend time, following all these intricate protocols because that's what's required. So yeah, it's always that yin and yang in the company
Yeah.
that we manage to balance, right? We call it the push pull. There's always like a
Sounds like
healthy push pull between the two disciplines.
good partnership.
Yeah.
So thinking more about like the user experience, you had mentioned athletes notice the difference on day one. What does that user journey look like from prepare to perform to recover, and how
Yeah. So
does go ahead?
exactly. So, I mean, you captured it right. So the way that we think about the athlete user journey is as an athlete, myself being an athlete. So we don't use the word athlete for pros, right? Athlete is anyone who lives quite an active life, an intentional life around their sport and around their performance. So, and actually what we noticed just from speaking with a lot of our customers, a lot of amateur athletes are a lot more professionalized than pro athletes. Why?
Okay.
Because pro athletes have a whole support system around them. They don't have to think about these things. They just get told what to do and they execute the instruction. The amateur needs to actually go and research this themselves because they don't have that support crew. They are their own support crew. So as a result of that, they're typically a lot more OTT than a lot of professionals. So the word athlete for us is interchangeable between the two. But yeah, I myself as an athlete, when I'm thinking about this, the easiest way is to is so in the day of an athlete, you're either prepping for a session, right? So you're getting the fuel in, the hydration in, the sodium in, whatever, proper rest to prepare for a session. You're then executing the session, so you're performing that session. And then after the session, you're recovering from the session. And you're constantly repeating that cycle, right? So today I did a race yesterday, so I'm in the recover state. And then later this afternoon, this evening, I'm going to be preparing for tomorrow's morning session. So you're always repeating that. As a first time user, straight out of the gates, you've unboxed the device. We don't know you as an athlete, right? You've never used the device. We don't know your sweat profile, so we don't know how your sweat reacts to different conditions. So we can't yet tell you how to prepare because we have no baseline of you. So what happens, the first bit of value that you actually get is on the recovery piece. Athletes who wear the sensor for their first session, they then action the recommendations that come from the device post that session, right? So when they sync the device to the app spits out to them, okay, this is what you lost. And as a function of what you lost, this is now what you need to consume to rehydrate, to recover from your losses. They experience within the first like 2 hours already, especially if they experience the symptoms of like kind of headaches or lethargy or like dizziness, that goes away because obviously they've adequately replaced the sodium and the fluid. Over time, what athletes notice is that their recovery time actually increases, so it speeds up because their body has a lot more basically of what it needs to transfer. So, when you're recovering, you're eating protein, you're eating carbohydrates. If you're not properly hydrated, that won't make its way into the muscle as quickly because it's your blood which transports this into the muscle. If your blood is thicker because there's not enough water in it, the transportation takes longer. Um, the absorption of that food is longer or slowed down, as a result of not enough sodium being there to allow the transfer into the cell. So all of these things impact recovery, and that you immediately experience from day one. If you cramp probably on the same evening at night, you won't cramp because you've properly hydrated. After 3 sessions of using the device, we build up your predictive model. So this is really where the things get a bit kind of scientific and geeky. Basically, we built machine learning models which understand you as an individual. And what we then do is we're able to simulate, and we have a minimum of 3 data points that we need. So we need a minimum of 3 sessions to be able to initially build up this model. Obviously, the more you use the device, the better that model gets at knowing you. Kind of makes sense. The more data, the more training data it has, the better it gets. But three is the minimum. So as soon as you started to use this sensor more frequently, that model unlocks. You can then use that model to prepare properly. So you can say to that model, hey, I'm going to do a 5-hour bike on Saturday. I'm going to start at 9 a.m. So then we're able to, and I'm going to do it here in this area. So then we're able to extrapolate the temperature across those 5 hours from 9 onwards. And we're able to predict, okay, you're realistically going to lose over those 5 hours around 7.3 liters of water and 4.4 grams of sodium, say. Then I, as an athlete, know exactly what I need to have in my bottles throughout that entire 5 hour ride to stay hydrated. Because obviously, prior to that, I would kind of just fill up my bottles at any opportunity, might not put sodium into that bottle, which would then result into in the session, towards the end of that session, so maybe the last 2 hours, I'd start to feel a bit crap. My sustained power output would probably drop down. My heart rate would go up. So I'm tapping into my glycogen more, right? So as a function of dehydration, your blood gets thicker. You then use more glycogen to circulate the blood around the body. So you start to deplete your glycogen stores quicker. So your body has less carbohydrate to go into the muscle. It's this whole cascading series of events which starts to unfold as a result of you simply not drinking enough.
Yeah.
So that we help mitigate by using the prepare tool.
Okay. So you're working with companies like Science and Sport to reformulate their products based on your data. How are you helping nutrition brands realize their customers are massively under consuming sodium?
Yeah, so we work with quite a few nutrition brands, just like very friendly relationships with them. And yeah, it kind of ranges from just like a initially making them aware of like the problem they're actually solving, which is for a large part that the formulation is highly inappropriate. So a lot of sport nutrition brands, as I said earlier, they still have quite low sodium concentration relative to like what the athlete is actually losing. So that's just one, just like a re-education, I would say, of what is actually appropriate from a formulation standpoint. But more importantly, it's the behavioral change. So we've seen just through the data and through people using the device, and we've inputted this ability for athletes to actually prompt back what they're consuming so we can personalize the recommendation more better to them. That data we all use to basically understand the user behaviors of people around their hydration habits. And yeah, around 85% underconsume sodium by a factor of 2 to 3 times.
Wow.
So if you're a
Okay.
nutrition brand, right,
Yeah.
say you're selling, I don't know, $50 worth of electrolyte to you this month, realistically, they should be selling at least $100 to $150 worth of electrolyte to me this month because that's what I actually need to get through my month of training. So it's helping both the end consumer understand how much sodium and how much water they actually need to do what it is that they want their body to do, in combination with the nutrition brand actually having the data to have a very plain and very honest and authentic conversation with their customer to say, you need more electrolyte. And instead of what is currently the relationship where brand tells customer or consumer, you need more of my product, consumers are like, well, obviously you're going to say that because you want more of my money. It completely flips that paradigm to where actually the customer is going to the brand saying, I need more of your product to get through this month. So it completely flips the consumer brand relationship,
Yeah.
purely using data as that centerpiece to create that authentic transaction and relationship.
Okay. So you mentioned conversations with Whoop and potential partnerships with wearable companies. How do you see FlowBio's technology extending beyond?
Yeah, it's a good question. And this kind of goes to the higher like mission of what it is that we're building. So our mission statement at FlowBio is to delete dehydration. Like it's very simple. In a world where we've done our job right in 10, 15 years, no one's suffering from dehydration. And we're obviously very honest with ourselves that in order to accomplish that mission, you need to branch further than just what we're able to do with our hardware because we're very cognizant of the fact that a dedicated piece of hardware isn't necessarily how you get to the hundreds of millions of customers out there. So initially, we're focusing on around 150 million consumers globally, which is in this what we call the performance economy space. So these are people who are actively living a very healthy and very performance-oriented lifestyle. They typically already have external wearables like heart rate monitors or sport and fitness watches, bike computers, so on and so forth. So that's our initial market, and we're very happy to play in that market. We really want to own that niche, and that's probably going to take us a good like 3 to 5 years to really dominate and become the flagship and kind of the namesake brand in that space. But really, in order to satisfy our mission of deleting dehydration, we need to extend beyond that hardware component. So really, from a technical standpoint, well, the outward facing mission at FlowBio is delete dehydration. The technical mission is to solve the thermoregulation equation. So it's to be able to fundamentally understand how our bodies thermoregulate and basically create digital twins of everyone and how their body would then react in various situations to thermoregulate, right? So in 10, 15 years time, we want to have technology which is able to understand how you and I right now are thermoregulating purely using software. So that typically right now is the way that we've best found how to approach that is using heart rate, right? Because if you think of heat creation, our bodies create heat. We need to dissipate that heat. So if you look at the source of heat creation, you can start to understand that thermoregulation equation. And for us as humans, the source of heat creation is heart rate, right? Our heart rate is what creates energy to circulate blood. It's what keeps us alive. In order to do that process, we actually generate a lot of heat. So the energy transfer that we actually are getting from our system is about a 30-70 split. So 30% of energy we create goes into keeping us alive and doing what we need to do. 70% of that
Damn.
energy is heat. So if we're able to solve that thermoregulatory equation and model for it and create algorithms behind that, we can install those models on any optical heart rate sensor or heart rate sensing capable device globally.
That's
And
pretty awesome.
that's and that's
Yeah.
that's really what we're building towards. So,
Yeah.
every company, and this is something that I love this, right? I love to study how companies start and just like the history of a company's evolution. Very few people, when they look at companies, actually know how that company started, right? Like, why would they? But if you look at the best companies in the world today, which are servicing, hundreds of millions of people, and that's how they're remembered, that's how they're considered. No one starts serving hundreds of millions of people. You typically start serving hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. So it's really us starting in that very small pocket corner of the world, very undisturbed. No one really knows we're there. Our competition doesn't even take us seriously because it's such an insignificantly small market. Who cares about that market? We care about that market because that's where we actually get paid to develop our technology. It's very rare for companies, especially in the hardware and modeling space. It's very rare that you actually get paid by your customers to create the data sets that you've required to create then this big vision technology. So for us, it's a phenomenal corner of the world. It's also a corner of the world that we're incredibly passionate about. But yeah, I mean, if I look at my desk, I'm surrounded by Apple products. All of us think of Apple as like this mass consumer product. Apple started for hackers. They were
Mm.
founded to help the homebrew community build their own PCs. And they were stocked in like 2 or 3 stores in the Bay Area. You had to physically go and buy the board and put together your own computer. That's how Apple, the world's most valuable company today, started. Boards which you had to put together as an end user. And that's I think something which is testament to how we also think about it. We love the small markets. We love the nitty gritty because that's where you have a safe place to prove out your tech,
Yeah.
whilst you build out the wider capability of what it is that you're building.
Oh, this has been great. For athletes listening who are curious about personalized hydration, what's the best way to learn?
I'd say the easiest probably source of information is our website. So, we're an online company. Obviously, we're physical in London, but most people experience us through our website. That's kind of how that's our storefront, so to speak. So we've got our sweat the details blog where we have a lot of the materials that I'm just kind of talking about. We have that in written format. I'd say, yeah, the website is probably the best place to go and inform yourself.
Whew, this was seriously eye-opening. Not just the tech, but the science behind how dynamic sweat really is. For anyone listening who's in the endurance space, nutrition, coaching, or even performance wearables, this isn't just interesting; it's game-changing. So we'll drop the links in the show notes, and I'll definitely encourage you to check out what FlowBio is building. And selfishly, I'm excited to continue this conversation offline and explore how this technology might integrate with some of the broader B2B opportunities in the space. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Wellness Growth Show. If today's conversation sparked something for you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the stories, strategies, and insights from the front lines of wellness innovation. If you're a founder, operator, or health leader exploring growth into institutional markets and have a story worth telling, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out directly on LinkedIn or YouTube. And if you found this valuable, share it with a peer or post it online. You never know who needs to hear it. Until next time, stay well, keep moving, and keep building what matters.